in the heart of Louisiana's bayou country, where moss-draped cypress trees rose from murky waters and alligators lurked beneath the surface, lay the small town of Chêne Vert. With a population of just over 3,000, Chêne Vert was a place where family ties ran as deep as the roots of the ancient oak trees that gave the town its name. The year was 2019, and as summer's sweltering heat began to wane, the town was preparing for its annual Fête du Bayou. Colorful banners adorned the streets, and the air was thick with the scent of spicy jambalaya and sweet beignets. But beneath this festive atmosphere, a dark secret was brewing that would soon shatter the town's close-knit community. At the center of this impending storm were the Thibodeaux family, one of the oldest and most respected clans in Chêne Vert. The family patriarch, Claude Thibodeaux, ran the town's only bank, while his wife Marie was the head of the local historical society. Their son, Jean-Luc, had left Chêne Vert years ago to pursue a career in New Orleans, returning only for holidays and special occasions. It was during one such visit, for the previous year's Fête du Bayou, that the seeds of tragedy were sown. Jean-Luc, now 35 and recently divorced, found himself drawn to his 22-year-old niece, Amélie. The daughter of Jean-Luc's older sister, Amélie had blossomed into a beautiful young woman during his years away. Her long, dark hair and sparkling green eyes were the talk of the town, and she had no shortage of suitors. But Amélie had eyes only for her uncle Jean-Luc. His sophisticated city ways and worldly charm captivated her, offering a glimpse of a life beyond the confines of Chêne Vert. What began as innocent flirtation at the family gathering soon evolved into something far more dangerous. But as the festivities of the fête wound down, Jean-Luc and Amélie found themselves alone on the banks of the bayou, the sounds of zydeco music fading in the distance. In the warm glow of the setting sun, they shared a kiss that would change their lives forever. Both knew their feelings were forbidden, that acting on them would tear their family apart. Jean-Luc returned to New Orleans, and Amélie stayed in Chêne Vert, but they couldn't forget that moment by the water. They began exchanging secret messages, their smartphones becoming conduits for a passion that grew with each passing day. Months passed, and their digital romance intensified. Jean-Luc found excuses to visit Chêne Vert more frequently, always managing to steal a few moments alone with Amélie. They met in secluded spots around town, the old boathouse, the abandoned sugar mill, anywhere they could be alone. As summer approached once again, bringing with it the promise of another Fête du Bayou, near Jean-Luc and Amélie's relationship reached a fever pitch. They could no longer bear the secrecy and the distance. Jean-Luc proposed a plan. He would leave his job in New Orleans, and they would run away together, somewhere far from the judgmental eyes of Chêne Vert. Amélie, intoxicated by the idea of escaping her small-town life and building a future with Jean-Luc, agreed. They set a date just after the fête, when the town would be recovering from the festivities and their absence might go unnoticed for a day or two. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in small towns like Chêne Vert. Amélie's younger brother, Etienne, had grown suspicious of his sister's behavior. He noticed her constant texting, her distracted demeanor, the way she would disappear for hours without explanation. One afternoon, while Amélie was helping their mother prepare for the fête, Etienne seized the opportunity to check her phone. What he found shocked him to his core: hundreds of messages between Amélie and Uncle Jean-Luc, filled with declarations of love and detailed plans for their escape. Etienne, torn between loyalty to his sister and the knowledge of the scandal that would engulf their family, decided to confront Amélie. He waited until late that night, when the house was quiet and their parents had gone to bed. "How could you, Amélie?" he whispered fiercely, cornering her in the kitchen. "Uncle Jean-Luc, do you have any idea what this will do to our family?" Amélie's face paled, then flushed with anger. "You had no right to go through my phone," he hissed. "This is none of your business, Etienne." "You don't understand. We're in love," Etienne scoffed. "Love?" He's our Uncle Aimé. This is sick. You need to end this now, or I'll tell Mom and Dad." Both of the siblings argued in hushed but heated tones, unaware that their father, Claude, had awakened and was now standing in the darkened hallway, listening with growing horror to every word. The next morning, the Thibodeaux household was a powder keg of tension. Claude, his face lined with worry and lack of sleep, called a family meeting. Marie, sensing something was terribly wrong, sat silently, her hands twisting in her lap. Claude looked at his daughter, his voice heavy with disappointment and anger. "Amélie, is there something you need to tell us?" Amalie, realizing her secret was out, broke down in tears. Between sobs, she confessed everything: her relationship with Jean Lucy, their plans to run away together. Marie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "This ends now," Claude declared, his tone brooking no argument. "I'm calling Jean-Luc. He is no longer welcome in this house or this town, and you, Amélie, are forbidden from contacting him again. Do you understand?" Amélie nodded mutely, but inside her heart was breaking. She knew she could never give up Jean Lucy, no matter what her family said. But the days leading up to the fête du bayou were tense in the Thibodeaux household. Amélie was a shadow of her former self, going through the motions of helping with preparations but clearly distracted and unhappy. Claude watched her like a hawk, confiscating her phone and monitoring her every move. Jean-Luc, meanwhile, had received a blistering phone call from his brother-in-law. Claude's threats were clear: stare femme Chêne Vert and Amélie, or face the consequences. But Jean-Luc, consumed by his passion for Amélie, couldn't accept that their love was over. As the fête approached, Jean-Luc formulated a new plan. He would come to Chêne Vert in secret, meet Amélie during the festivities, and they would leave together as originally planned. He sent a cryptic message to Amélie's best friend, Sophie, knowing she would pass it along. The night of the fête arrived, and Chêne Vert was alive with music, laughter, and the aroma of Cajun cuisine. The Thibodeaux family was out in force, Claude and Marie putting on a brave face for the townsfolk, while Amélie listlessly helped at the family's food stall. As the evening wore on, Amélie made her move. Feigning a headache, she told her parents she was going home to lie down. Instead, she slipped away to the old boathouse where she and Jean-Luc had arranged to meet. Jean-Luc was already there, his rental car hidden among the trees nearby. When Amélie appeared, they fell into each other's arms, their kiss desperate and hungry. "Are you sure about this?" Jean-Luc asked, searching Amélie's eyes. "But once we leave, there's no going back." Amélie nodded firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything. I love you, Jean-Luc. Let's go now." But as they turned to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Claude, his face a mask of fury. "I thought I made myself clear," he growled, advancing on the couple. "This ends now. What happened next would be the subject of speculation and horror for years to come." In the ensuing confrontation, fueled by rage, shame, and desperation, violence erupted. The old boathouse, witness to so many of Jean-Luc and Amélie's secret meetings, now became the scene of a terrible tragedy. In the struggle that followed, Claude, blind with fury, shoved Jean-Luc with all his might. Jean-Luc stumbled backward, his head striking the corner of an old workbench with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Amélie screamed, dropping to her knees beside Jean-Luc's most motionless body. Claude stood frozen, the reality of what he'd done slowly sinking in. For a long moment, the only sound was Amélie's anguished sobs. "He's dead," Amélie whispered, looking up at her father with eyes full of horror and accusation. "You killed him." Claude, his anger evaporating in an instant, felt the weight of his actions crash down upon him. He had come to stop a scandal, to protect his family, but in doing so, he had destroyed everything. We need to call the police," Claude said, his voice shaking. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew what that would mean. His life, his family's reputation, everything he had worked for would be ruined. As Emily, still cradling Jean Lucy's body, spat out, "How can you think of yourself at a time like this? You murdered him." Claude's mind raced. The music from the feet could still be heard in the distance. The town was distracted. If they acted quickly, maybe. "Listen to me, Amelie," Claude said, his tone urgent. "No one knows we're here. If we hide this, we can protect our family. We can say Jean-Luc never showed up. That he's missing." Amelie looked at her father in disbelief. "You want to cover this up?" "He's your brother-in-law, my uncle, the man I love, and if we come forward, I'll go to prison. Our family will be ruined. Is that what you want?" Claude pleaded, desperation clear in his voice. For a long moment, Amelie said nothing, her eyes moving from Jean-Luc's ease and still face to her father's anguished one. Then, slowly, she nodded. "What do we do?" Working quickly and quietly, Claude and Amelie wrapped Jean Lucy's body in an old tarp found in the boathouse. They cleaned the blood as best they could, using the murky bayou water to wash away the evidence. Claude backed his truck up to the boathouse, and together they loaded Jean Lucy's body into the bed, covering it with a pile of old fishing nets. As they drove deep into the bayou, Amelie sat silently, tears streaming down her face. They found a secluded spot, far from any hiking trails or fishing camps. The swamp here was deep and dark, home to alligators and water moccasins. Claude and Amelie struggled with the weight of the body, finally managing to push it into the murky water. They watched as it slowly sank beneath the surface, taking with it their hopes, dreams, and innocence. The drive back to town was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the outskirts of Chêne Vert, Claude finally spoke. "We'll say we don't know anything, that we thought he wasn't coming to the feet. We stick to that story, no matter what. Understand?" Emily nodded mutely, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The next few days were a blur of activity and mounting tension. Jean Lucy's absence was noted, first with annoyance by his employers in New Orleans, then with growing concern by his friends and family. Claude and Amelie played their parts, expressing worry and confusion along with everyone else. But the strain of their secret began to take its toll. Amelie became withdrawn, spending hours locked in her room. Claude threw himself into his work at the bank, staying late into the night to avoid going home and facing his family. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Jean-Luc, the police became involved. Missing person posters with Jean Lucy's face appeared all over Chêne Vert and neighboring towns. Search parties combed the bayou, coming dangerously close to the spot where Jean Lucy's body lay hidden beneath the murky waters. The investigation focused on Jean Lucy's life in New Orleans, looking into possible connections to criminal elements or financial troubles. But as leads dried up and time passed, attention began to turn back to Chêne Vert and the Thibodeaux family. Rumors began to circulate about Jean Lucy's last known whereabouts. Someone remembered seeing a car like his on the outskirts of town the night of the fete. Another recalled a heated phone conversation between Claude and Jean-Luc in the days leading up to the festival. The pressure on Claude and Amelie intensified. Each police interview, each concerned inquiry from a family member or friend felt like a tightening noose. They clung to their story, but the weight of their secret threatened to crush them. Amelie, consumed by grief and guilt, began to unravel. She lost weight, her once vibrant eyes now dull and haunted. Her nightmares, filled with images of Jean Lucy's lifeless body sinking into the bayou, left her sleepless and on edge. Claude watched his daughter's decline with growing alarm. He had acted to protect his family, but now he saw that his actions were tearing them apart. Marie, unaware of the truth but sensing the tension between her husband and daughter, became increasingly distressed. As months passed, life in Chêne Vert attempted to return to normal. But the mystery of Jean Lucy's disappearance hung over the town like a heavy fog. The once tight-knit community was now fraught with suspicion and whispered theories. The strain began to show in Claude's work at the bank. He made uncharacteristic errors, his mind constantly preoccupied with the fear of discovery. Customers noticed his distraction, and rumors began to spread about the bank's stability under his leadership. Emily, unable to bear the burden of their secret any longer, began to contemplate confession. The guilt was eating her alive, and the thought of living the rest of her life with this lie was unbearable. One evening, as a spring storm raged outside, Amélie approached her father in his study. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to tell the truth." Claude looked up from his desk, his face haggard with stress and lack of sleep. "We can't," he said firmly. "Think of what it would do to your mother, to Etienne, to the whole family, and what about Jean-Luc's family?" But Emily countered, her voice rising. "They deserve to know the truth, to have closure." Their argument escalated, voices rising above the sound of rain and thunder. Neither noticed Marie standing in the doorway, her face pale with shock as she overheard their heated exchange. Enough, Marie's voice cut through their argument like a knife. "What truth? What have you done, Claude?" And Amélie froze, turning to see Marie trembling in the doorway. In that moment, they knew their carefully constructed lie was about to crumble. Over the next few hours, the full story came out. Marie listened in horror as Claude and Amélie recounted the events of that fateful night, the confrontation at the boathouse, Jean-Luc's accidental death, and their decision to hide the body in the bayou. When they finished, Marie sat in stunned silence for a long moment. Then, with a resolve that surprised both Claude and Amélie, she stood. "We're going to the police," she said, her voice firm. "Now, this ends tonight." Claude began to protest, but Marie cut him off. "No more lies, no more cover-ups. We've already lost Jean-Luc. I won't lose my soul, or the souls of my family, to this deception." As the storm continued to rage outside, the Thibodeaux family made their way to the local police station. The night deputy, startled by their appearance at such a late hour, listened in growing shock as Claude confessed to his role in Jean-Luc's death and the subsequent cover-up. The news spread through Chêne Vert like wildfire. By morning, the whole town knew that the mystery of Jean-Luc's disappearance had been solved in the most tragic and unexpected way. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Police divers recovered Jean-Luc's body from the bayou, and a full investigation was launched. Claude was arrested and charged with manslaughter and tampering with evidence. Amélie, due to her role in the cover-up, faced charges of accessory after the fact. The town of Chêne Vert reeled from the revelations. The Thibodeaux family, once respected pillars of the community, now found themselves at the center of a scandal that shook the town to its core. The bank temporarily closed its doors, its future uncertain without Claude at the helm. The historical society, long Marie's pride and joy, scrambled to distance itself from the family's disgrace. As news of the tragedy spread beyond the borders of Chêne Vert, media trucks began to appear on the quiet streets of the bayou town. Reporters from New Orleans and Baton Rouge descended upon the community, hungry for details of the salacious story that combined forbidden love, family betrayal, and small-town secrets. The Thibodeaux' home, once a symbol of success and respectability, now stood empty and forlorn. Marie, unable to bear the weight of the memories and the constant scrutiny of neighbors, had gone to stay with relatives in Lafayette. Etienne, devastated by the revelation of his sister's affair and his father's actions, threw himself into his studies, rarely emerging from his dorm room at LSU. Amélie, released on bail pending trial, became a virtual prisoner in her own home. She ventured out only for necessary errands, always under the watchful and often hostile eyes of the townspeople. The once vivacious young woman was now a shell of her former self, her dreams of escape with Jean-Luc replaced by the grim reality of her uncertain future. As the case progressed, the details that emerged painted a complex picture of love, betrayal, and tragic circumstance. The prosecution built a case around Claude's actions on the night of Jean-Luc's death, arguing that while the death might have been accidental, the decision to cover it up was a calculated act that deserved a severe punishment. Emily's role in the affair and subsequent cover-up became a point of contention. Her defense team argued that she had been manipulated by Jean-Luc, an older family member in a position of trust, and that her actions after his death were driven by shock and fear of her father. The trial, when it finally began, was held in the parish seat of St. Martinville, the small Chêne Vert courthouse deemed inadequate for the high-profile case. Each day, a procession of cars would make the journey from Chêne Vert to St. Martinville, the townsfolk torn between a desire to support their neighbors and a morbid fascination with the unfolding drama. Over the course of 3 weeks, the sordid details of the case were laid bare. Text messages between Jean-Luc and Amélie were read aloud, their passionate declarations of love and plans for the future now tainted by the tragedy that followed. Forensic experts testified about the condition of Jean-Lucie's body when it was recovered, the technical details a stark contrast to the emotional testimony of family members. Perhaps the most powerful moment of the trial came when Marie Thibodeaux took the stand. Her testimony, delivered in a voice that wavered between anger and grief, laid bare the devastation wrought upon her family by the actions of those she had trusted most. "I lost my brother," she said, her eyes moving between Claude and Amélie. "But I also lost my husband and my daughter that night. The people I thought I knew, they died alongside Jean-Luc." And as the trial neared its conclusion, the town of Chêne Vert held its collective breath. The case had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of love, the weight of family obligations, and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. In his closing arguments, the prosecutor painted a picture of Claude as a man driven by pride and fear of scandal, willing to go to any lengths to protect his family's reputation. Amélie, he argued, was not an innocent victim but a willing participant in both the affair and its cover-up. The defense, in turn, emphasized the accidental nature of Jean-Luc's death and the panic that followed. They portrayed Claude as a father trying to protect his daughter, and Amélie as a young woman manipulated by an older relative and then coerced by her father's actions. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood, the rustling of paper the only sound as he prepared to read the decision. On the charge of manslaughter, we find the defendant, Claude Thibodeaux, guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs from the Thibodeaux family. On the charge of tampering with evidence, we find the defendant, Claude Thibodeaux. Claude stood stoically, his face a mask of resignation as the verdicts were read. On the charge of accessory after the fact, we find the defendant, Amélie Thibodeaux, guilty. Amelie's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she heard her fate pronounced. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, took a moment to gather her thoughts before delivering the sentences. She looked first at Claude, her gaze unflinching. "Claude Thibodeaux, the court sentences you to 15 years in state prison for the crime of manslaughter, and an additional 5 years for tampering with evidence, to be served consecutively." She then turned to Amélie, her expression softening slightly. "Amélie Thibodeaux, taking into account your age and the circumstances surrounding your involvement, this court sentences you to 5 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 1/3 of your sentence." And as the sentences were pronounced, a mix of reactions rippled through the courtroom. Some felt justice had been served, while others believed the punishments were too harsh given the accidental nature of Jean-Lucie's death. On the Thibodeaux family, what remained of it, clung to each other, their world forever altered. And in the days that followed, Chêne Vert struggled to come to terms with the outcome of the trial. The town that had once prided itself on its close-knit community and strong family values now grappled with the knowledge that such a dark secret had festered in their midst. The old boathouse, the site of Jean-Luc and Amélie's clandestine meetings, and the scene of the fatal confrontation. became an unofficial memorial. Flowers and candles appeared on its weathered steps, left by those seeking to make sense of the tragedy.